The narrative, as it is set out in Jorge Luis Borges' short story, Tlön, Uqbar Orbus Tertius, begins in a kind of minor way and is going to gradually expand to quite literally fill the world that we know. And one of the key ideas is, well, who is actually behind this, which we find out really about 2/3 of the way through the story. So it begins, as we see, I owe the discovery of Uqbar to the conjunction of a mirror and an encyclopedia. So there is an interesting quip that is made by Bioy Casares about mirrors. Mirrors in copulation are abominable, for they multiply the number of mankind. Borges asks him, where did you get that quote from? And he says, well, it was recorded in the Anglo-American Encyclopedia in its article on Uqbar. So they go and get this encyclopedia, which is actually, it turns out, a sort of knockoff or pirated version of the Encyclopedia Britannica. One gets the idea that a lot of that was going on in that time in foreign countries outside of Britannica's, you could say, control. And so they're looking for it, and they can't find the article. And then the next day, Bioy called me from Buenos Aires. He told me he had the article on Uqbar right in front of him in the encyclopedia. The heresiarch's name wasn't given, but the entry did report his doctrine, formulated in words almost identical to those Bioy had quoted, though from a literary point of view perhaps inferior. And the text ran, for one of those Gnostics, the visible universe was an illusion, or more precisely a sophism. Mirrors and fatherhood are hateful because they multiply and proclaim it. So Borges says, I'd like to check out this article, or at least the narrator may not be Borges himself, as we're going to find out a little bit later on. And Bioy brings the article to him, and it is indeed volume 46 of the Anglo-American Encyclopedia. But instead of having 917 pages, it has 921. The 4 additional pages are an article on Uqbar. So they compare the volumes, and that is the only difference between them. Some volumes have this, other volumes don't. And they read the article. It seems like it's got to be a fictional place. There's only a few countries and names that they recognize: Khorasan, Armenia, Erzurum. And we find out that there's a section, Language and Literature, with one memorable feature. The article said the literature of Uqbar was a literature of fantasy, and that its epics and legends never referred to reality, but rather to 2 imaginary realms of Mlalkas and Tlön. Right? So we're getting Tlön, this what's going to be an entire planet, getting mentioned already in this. Then they go to the National Library and they look through atlases, catalogs, indices, memoirs of travelers and historians. No one had ever been in Uqbar. So kind of a weird little mystery, right? And then, so this is in part 2 of the story, we run across a different kind of, not entry, but indeed encyclopedia itself. And it's tied in with this guy, Herbert Ashe, who ends up dying. He was friends with the narrator's father. He had one of those close English friendships that begin by excluding confidences and soon eliminate conversation. So Ashe left this sealed certified package from Brazil containing a book in the bar where the narrator finds it, and he leafs through it and experienced a slight astonished sense of dizziness that he will not describe, since this is not the story of my emotions, but Uqbar and Tlön and Orbus Tertius. And what is it? The book is written in English, consists of 101 pages, and on the yellow spine, I read these curious words, which were repeated on the false cover. a First Encyclopedia of Tlön, volume 11, Higher to Younger. No date or place of publication, and there's a color illustration stamped with a blue oval with the inscription Orbus Tertius. Now, Orbus Tertius, third ball, third orb. Well, that's Earth, right? But this is going to be about a different, alternate Earth. And we're going to read, as we go on, all sorts of interesting things that the narrator is summarizing about Tlön. And there's a few things that I want to highlight. So he talks about holding in his hands a vast and systematic fragment of the entire history of an unknown planet. And then he goes on to tell us what it includes. Architectures, playing cards, the horror of its mythologies, the murmur of its tongues, its emperors and its seas, its minerals and its birds and fishes, its algebra and its fire, its theological and metaphysical controversies, all joined, articulated, coherent, and with no visible doctrinal purpose or hint of parody. So we've got all this information, as you would expect from an encyclopedia that has 1,001 pages just in that volume. And it is a vast fragment, a systematic fragment. We can see there is something well organized there, well understood by those who are writing about it, right? So this is quite important and interesting. And they're, trying to figure out, well, what is this? What is it referring to? So they ransack the libraries of the two Americas and Europe, trying to find other volumes. They don't find them. Alfonso Reyes, weary of those subordinate drudgeries of a detective nature, in his words, has proposed that we undertake to reconstruct the many massive volumes that are missing, ex ungue leonem. He figures, half seriously, half in jest, a generation of Tlönists would suffice, that people working on that. The bold estimate takes us back to the initial problem, which we're going to come to in just a moment. But there is something that I want to highlight here. So what do we find out about this? There is the hint of a great system, a integrated reality. He's going to talk about it. Tlön is not a chaos. Today we know it is a cosmos. A cosmos is both, a world or universe, but it also means order and even beauty in its original sense. A cosmos which has its own innermost laws that govern it. These have been formulated, however provisionally so. We can learn about this virtual, imaginary, fictional world in great depth and detail. So now we come back to the key question. All right, well, who came up with this? Where did this volume come from? It didn't grow on a volume tree or something like that. So he says, who, singular or plural, invented Tlön? The plural is, I suppose, inevitable. The hypothesis of a single inventor, some infinite Leibniz, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, the great, early modern philosopher, sometimes called the universal genius of Europe. That's who he's referring to here. Working in obscurity and self-effacement, that has been unanimously discarded. It is conjectured this brave new world is the work of a secret society of, and now notice all the people he's going to rattle off, all these experts: astronomers, biologists, engineers, metaphysicians, poets, chemists, algebraists, moralists, painters, geometers, ... So maybe more as well, guided and directed by some shadowy man of genius. There are many men adept in those diverse disciplines, but few capable of imagination, fewer still capable of subordinating imagination to a rigorous and systematic plan. The plan is so vast, the contribution of each writer is infinitesimal. That means it's very, very small. But they add up. And so, this is the conjecture. And we are going to learn all about what Tlön is like. And then we come to postscript, 1947, and we learn that the narrator perhaps is a different person than the person so far telling the story. I reproduce the article above exactly as appeared in the Anthology of Fantastic Literature, 1940. The only changes being editorial cuts of one or another metaphor and a tongue-in-cheek sort of summary that would now be considered flippant. And he says, many things have happened since 1940. Allow me to recall some of them. So what we're going to find out in a handwritten letter from Gunnar Ehrfjord in a book by Hinton that belonged to Herbert Ashe. It was postmarked Uro Preto. And what do we find out? The mystery of Tlön was fully elucidated by the letter. We're going to find out who this shadowy secret society is, and it confirms Martinez Estrada's hypothesis, another person conjecturing about these matters. And what is it? Well, we find out that in the 17th century, a secret society was formed, and it included, for example, George Berkeley, who is going to play a role earlier in the story, at least his philosophy is. Its mission to invent a country. In its vague initial program, there figured Hermetic studies, philanthropy, and the Kabbalah. After several years of confabulations and premature collaborative drafts, the members of the society realized one generation would not suffice for creating and giving full expression to a country. So each of the masters selects a disciple to carry on their work, and now we have a self-perpetuating secret society oriented around this project of making up, inventing a country, right? So they eventually bring this to an American millionaire's attention, a quirky guy, and he ends up saying, your project is too modest. He told the man in America it was nonsense to invent a country. They need to expand their scope, invent an entire planet. And he does a couple other things as well. To that giant of an idea, he added another, the brainchild of his nihilism. The enormous enterprise must be kept secret. He suggests a systematic encyclopedia of the illusory planet. And he would give them all the wealth that he has. There's one condition: the work shall make no pact with the impostor, Jesus Christ, right? So they begin on this work, and what do we find out? They produce 40 volumes eventually in this First Encyclopedia of Tlön. In 1914, they sent its members the final volume of it. It was published secretly, the 40 volumes that made up the work, the grandest work of letters ever undertaken by humankind, were to be the basis for yet another, more painstaking work, to be written this time not in English, but one of the languages of Tlön. Now, with what we actually know about those languages of Tlön from these encyclopedias, we can imagine, conjecture, speculate that this would be quite an endeavor. It's not going to be like the encyclopedias that we're used to, written in English, French, Spanish, whatever languages it happens to be, because the languages of Tlön are arranged, you could say, on the basis of very different metaphysical assumptions. So this would require somebody who can actually think that way, not just imagine that way. Somebody who is, in a certain sense, almost a resident of Tlön. So this is the setup for going deeper now into this fictional world, a fiction suggested in a short story, which itself is a fiction produced by this secret society or conspiracy, if you like, to invent a fictional planet, and then not just to invent it, but to allow everybody else to find out about it and to be affected by